Hello everyone, welcome to Litrophile. Today, let's do a quick analysis of a few more questions from the British Literature section of English Literature. The first question being, who is the author of Epipsychidion? Option A, Coleridge. Option B, Wordsworth. Option C, Keats. And option D, Shelley. And the solution to the question is, the answer to the question is option D, Shelley. Now, Epipsychidion is a major poetical work that was published in 1821 by Percy Bysshe Shelley, and it was subtitled Verses Addressed to the Noble and Unfortunate Lady Emilia V., now imprisoned in the convent of Dash. The title is actually Greek for concerning or about a little soul. So, Epipsychidion is the Greek word for the phrase concerning or about a little soul. Other significant works by Shelley include Ozymandias, To a Skylark. It is an ode to a skylark, Ode to the West Wind, etc. Now, before we move on to the next question, let's do a quick analysis of all the other options as well. Now, all the four options contain famous poets of the Romantic age. If you look at Coleridge, some of his significant works include Kubla Khan, Christabel, Biographia Literaria, which is seen as his critical manifesto, Frost at Midnight, Dejection and Ode, etc. Looking at Wordsworth, his important works include I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, The Prelude, Lines Written a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, The Solitary Reaper, etc. Those are some of Wordsworth's important works. Then moving on to Keats. Some of his important works include Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to Autumn, Ode on a Grecian Urn, La Belle Dame sans Mercé, Endymion, Hyperion, etc. So the answer to this question about who composed Epipsychidion, the answer is Shelley. Let's quickly move on to the next question. It's a quote from one of Shakespeare's plays. The better part of valour is discretion. This particular quote occurs in Shakespeare's which play? That's the question. And the options given here are Hamlet, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, Henry IV, Part 1. And the answer to this question is Henry IV, Part 1. Now, this line comes from Shakespeare's history play Henry IV, Part 1. Act 5, Scene 4. Okay, so this line is taken from Act 5, Scene 4 of Shakespeare's history play, Henry IV, Part 1. Now, who speaks this line? It's spoken by Shakespeare's popular knight, very popular knight, Sir John Falstaff. Now, Sir John Falstaff appears in around 4 of Shakespeare's plays. So, he's a very popular character who keeps repeating in many of his plays. Now, as for the meaning of this line, this specific line means that one would be foolish to act like a hero if it is going to disadvantage one, and it's better to stop yourself if an action that you would like to take is going to hurt you. But in this specific instance of Falstaff, it is deeply cynical. Now let's look at why. One of the main themes of this particular play, Henry IV, Part 1, is honor. Shakespeare looks at honor from several angles, and the character and actions of Falstaff is a close and serious look at one of those aspects of honor. And in Falstaff's case, the focus is on lack of honor. So, the answer to this question, the better part of valor, is discretion. It occurs in Shakespeare's history play, Henry IV, Part 1, and is taken from Act 5, Scene 4. Now, before moving on to the next question, let's briefly analyze the other options. All the other options are plays written by Shakespeare. The first option was Hamlet. Hamlet is about the ghost of the King of Denmark who tells his son Hamlet to avenge his murder by killing the new king, who is Hamlet's uncle. Hamlet pretends to be mad. He contemplates life and death, and he seeks revenge. His uncle, who fears for his life, also devises a plot to kill Hamlet. The play ends with a duel during which the king, the queen, Hamlet's opponent and Hamlet himself are all killed. So by the time the play ends, you find that the stage is strewn with dead bodies in this particular play, Hamlet. The next play mentioned here is Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night is about Viola, who is separated from her twin Sebastian. And Viola dresses up as a boy and works for the Duke Orsino, whom she falls in love with. Now, Orsino is in love with Countess Olivia and sends Viola to court her for him. But Olivia falls for Viola instead. And Sebastian arrives, causing a flood of mistaken identity, and finally marries Olivia. Viola then reveals that she's a girl and gets to marry Orsino. So that's a brief plotline of Twelfth Night. The next play mentioned here is The Tempest. Now, The Tempest is about the central character is Prospero, who uses magic to conjure up a storm and torment the survivors of a specific shipwreck, including the King of Naples and Prospero's treacherous brother Antonio. Prospero's slave Caliban plots to rid himself of his master, but is thwarted by Prospero's spirit servant Ariel. Ariel is the good spirit and Caliban is the evil spirit. Now, the king's young son Ferdinand, thought to be dead, falls in love with Prospero's daughter Miranda. Their celebrations are cut short when Prospero confronts his brother and reveals his identity as the usurped Duke of Milan. The families are reunited and all the conflict is resolved. Prospero grants Ariel his freedom and prepares to leave the island. So that is a brief idea of what the plot of The Tempest. Let's move on to the next question. The question is, epic similes are found in which work of John Milton? The options are A. Paradise Lost, option B. Sonnets, that is sonnets written by Milton, option C. Lycidas, option D. Areopagitica. And the answer to this question is option A. Paradise Lost. Now, Paradise Lost, it's an epic poem in blank verse written by John Milton. It was published in 1667 in 10 books, and later it was published again in 1674. It was revised into 12 books in that year. In 1674, it was revised into 12 books. Now, we also need to look at what an epic simile is. An epic simile, which is otherwise called as a Homeric simile, is an elaborate comparison that travels beyond the point of comparison and gives a complete poetic picture of some specific scene or incident. They are normally used for illustration and ornamentation, and they add dignity to the style of writing. The first epic simile that you find in this particular poem, Paradise Lost, is in Book 1, lines 197 to 208. And these are the lines which describe Satan. His great size is suggested by comparing him first to the Titans who warred against the Olympian gods, and then to the great sea monster Leviathan. Another significant simile is the one which compares the innumerable angels fallen and groveling in the lake of fire to the cloud of locusts. Milton's comparison of angels with locusts are significant because the locusts are messengers of disasters, and their association with the angel serves to suggest the evil nature of the fallen angel. Milton, in another simile, compares the fallen angels with the autumnal leaves thickly strewn on the streams in Vallombrosa. The reference of fallen leaves is very appropriate since it suggests and reinforces the fallen nature and diminished glory of the angels in hell. So, the answer to this question, epic simile, found in which work of John Milton? The answer is Paradise Lost. Before moving on to the next question, let's briefly analyze the other options given in the question as well. The second option, option B, is about the sonnets written by Milton. So Milton has written around 24 sonnets, and Miltonic sonnets are thematically extremely different. Instead of themes which include romantic love or nature, Miltonic sonnets often deal with politics and moral issues thematically, and they use the specific technique of enjambment to tighten the sonnet structure. The third option given is Lycidas. Lycidas is a monody which is in the form of a pastoral elegy, which was written in 1637, lamenting the accidental death by drowning of Milton's very good friend Edward King, who was an extremely promising, young, talented man. The fourth option is Areopagitica, which is subtitled A Speech of Mr. John Milton for the Liberty of Unlicensed Printing to the Parliament of England. Now, this is a 1644 prose polemic by John Milton, and it opposes licensing and censorship. Let's move on to the next question. Identify the writer who used the pseudonym Angelo Titmarsh for much of his early works. Identify the writer who used the pseudonym Angelo Titmarsh for much of his early works. Option A, Charles Dickens. Option B, W.M. Thackeray, William Makepeace Thackeray. Option C, Graham Greene. And option D, D.H. Lawrence. Now, if you analyze the options, you see that the first two options include major Victorian novelists, while the third and the fourth options are major 20th century novelists. And the answer to this question is William Makepeace Thackeray. Now, W.M. Thackeray or William Makepeace Thackeray uses the pseudonym Angelo Titmarsh in many of his early works like The Irish Sketchbook, Picture Gossip, Reading a Poem, etc. Other important works of fiction written by William Makepeace Thackeray include Vanity Fair, Pendennis, The Luck of Barry London, The Virginians, etc. Looking at the other options, we have Charles Dickens, who is famous. He's a famous Victorian novelist, and he's famous for using social realism in his works. And some of his important works include Hard Times, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Nicholas Nickleby, Bleak House, A Tale of Two Cities, etc. Graham Greene, he's a major 20th century novelist who is well known for his Catholic novels and thrillers, mainly novels of espionage. And some of his important works are Our Man in Havana, The Third Man, The End of the Affair, Brighton Rock, The Quiet American, The Fallen Idol, etc. Next option is D.H. Lawrence. D.H. Lawrence is a modernist writer who focused on the dehumanizing effects of modernity and industrialization on people. And some of his major works include Lady Chatterley's Lover, Sons and Lovers, Women in Love, The Rocking Horse Winner, The Rainbow, etc. So the answer to this question, identify the writer who used the pseudonym Angelo Titmarsh for much of his early work, is option B, W.M. Thackeray. Moving on to the next question. Browning's famous poem, Rabbi Ben Ezra, is included in which of the following collections? So the first option A, is Dramatis Personae. Option B, Dramatic Idylls. Option C, Asolando. And option D, Red Cotton Nightcap Country. So if you look at the options, you see that Red Cotton Nightcap Country is a poem written by Robert Browning, while all the other three options are volumes or collections of poems written by Robert Browning. And the answer to this question, the collection which includes the poem Rabbi Ben Ezra by Robert Browning, is Dramatis Personae. Option A, Dramatis Personae. Dramatis Personae is a poetry collection published in 1864 that contains famous poems of Robert Browning like Abbot Vogler, Rabbi Ben Ezra, Caliban upon Setebos, May and Death, Prospice, etc. The second option is Dramatic Idylls. It's a collection of 6 poems written by Robert Browning, and it was published in 1879. Asolando is the third option. Asolando is the last volume of poems that was published in the year 1889 by Robert Browning. It contained 5 poems, including Prologue, Summum Bonum, Bad Dreams 3, Flute Music with an Accompaniment, and Epilogue. So there were a total of 5 poems included in the last volume of poems published by Robert Browning, which was called Asolando. And the last option, I told you, it's the only option that contains a poem written by Robert Browning, while the other 3 were poetry collections. So Red Cotton Nightcap Country, which is otherwise called as Turf and Towers, is a poem in blank verse that's written by Robert Browning. It was published in the year 1873. And it tells a story of sexual intrigue, religious obsession, and violent death in contemporary Paris and Normandy. And it's closely based upon the true story of the death, which was supposedly believed to be a suicide, of the jewelry heir Antoine Mellereau. So, moving on to the next question, which is S.T. Coleridge, or Samuel Taylor Coleridge, a very famous romantic poet. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an associate of dash. Which society is he associated with? So the options are the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Royal Society of London, option C, the Royal Society of Arts, and option D, Royal Society of Literature. And the answer to this question is option D, Royal Society of Literature. The Royal Society of Literature, otherwise called RSL, is a learned society that was founded in the year 1820 by King George IV in order to reward literary merit and excite literary talent. And Coleridge was an associate with RSL, or Royal Society of Literature. So the answer to this question is option D. Looking at the other options, the Royal Society of Edinburgh is Scotland's National Academy of Science and Letters. The Royal Society of London, which was formerly called the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, is a learned society and the UK's National Academy of Sciences that was founded in the year 1660. And the third option, Royal Society of Arts, is a London-based organization committed entirely to finding practical solutions to social challenges. So the answer to the question, S.T. Coleridge was an associate with which society? The answer is Royal Society of Literature. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following is an unfinished novel by Jane Austen? Option A, Sense and Sensibility. Option B, Mansfield Park. Option C, Sanditon. And option D, Persuasion. Now, there are two unfinished novels written by Jane Austen. One is Sanditon and the other one is The Watsons. And the novel Sanditon was initially titled The Brothers. So, the answer to this question is option C, Sanditon. Looking at the other options, we have Sense and Sensibility, which was a novel published in 1811. It tells the story of the Dashwood sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, as they come of age. Mansfield Park, which is the next option, was a novel that was published in 1814, again by Jane Austen. The heroine Fanny Price comes to live with her wealthy relatives, who are the Bertrams, at Mansfield Park when she is just 10 years old. And Fanny's moral strength eventually wins her complete acceptance by the Bertram family and also marriage to Edmund Bertram himself. The next option, option D, is Persuasion. Persuasion is a novel that was published in 1817 and it tells the story of a second chance, the reawakening of love between Anne Elliot and Captain Frederick Wentworth, whom 8 years earlier she had been persuaded not to marry. Okay, so all the four are novels written by Jane Austen, and out of which Sanditon is the unfinished work by Jane Austen, and it was initially titled The Brothers. Apart from Sanditon, there is another unfinished novel written by Jane Austen, which is The Watsons. Let's move on to the next question. Why did Miss Havisham remain a spinster throughout her life in Great Expectations? Options are option A, she was poor. Option B, she was arrogant. Option C, because she was jilted at the altar by the bridegroom. And option D, she was simply unwilling to marry. Now, Miss Havisham is a very popular character associated with Charles Dickens's novel Great Expectations. Now, Great Expectations was published in the year 1861. And why would she remain a spinster throughout her life in this novel Great Expectations? Now, she's a wealthy spinster and she was once jilted at the altar, and she insists on wearing her wedding dress for the rest of her life. She lives in a ruined mansion with her adopted daughter of the name Estella. Now, Dickens describes her as looking like the witch of the palace. Then she sticks to wearing her wedding dress for the rest of her life because she was once jilted at the altar by the bridegroom. So the correct option or the correct answer to this question is option C, because she was jilted at the altar by the bridegroom. Let's quickly move on to the next question. W.B. Yeats, otherwise called William Butler Yeats, he received the Nobel Prize for Literature in which year? Options are 1938, option B 1925, option C 1932, and option D 1923. The answer to this question is option D 1923. The Nobel Prize in Literature 1923 was awarded to William Butler Yeats for his always inspired poetry, which in a highly artistic form gives expression to the spirit of a whole nation. And in 1938, the Nobel Prize winner for literature was Pearl S. Buck. In 1925, the Nobel Prize for Literature was awarded to George Bernard Shaw. And in 1932, the Nobel Prize for Literature was awarded to John Galsworthy, with a special mention regarding his Forsyte saga of novels. So the answer to the question, when did W.B. Yeats receive the Nobel Prize for Literature? It was in the year 1923. Let's move on to the last and final question, which is the Romantic revival in English poetry was influenced by which of the following revolutions or movements? Option A, French Revolution. Option B, Glorious Revolution of 1688. Option C, Reformation. And option D, Oxford Movement. And the answer to this question, Romantic revival in English poetry was influenced by the French Revolution. Option A, French Revolution. Now, Romantic revival was basically the result of several forces. But one of the significant forces that shaped Romantic revival would be the French Revolution, which happened between 1789 and 1799. The French Revolution brought a violent end to feudal powers and monarchy and asserted the right and supremacy of the individual free will. That's the key phrase, the individual free will. The new philosophy of the rights of all men was expressed both in politics and in literature. And this led to liberalism in literature. The political liberalism of French Revolution inspired the liberation, individuality, and rejection of prescribed rules in the Romantic literature. The Romantic poets were extensively inspired by the ideals of equality, fraternity, and liberty. They revolted strongly against the tyranny of set formulas, rules, and conventions, and they asserted the dignity of individual spirit. Romantics search for fresh subject, their belief in nature, their emphasis upon spontaneity, and their belief that everyone has a right to express his own idea are the features of individualism, which was the prime demand of French Revolution. So Romantic revival was greatly influenced by the French Revolution. Now looking at the other options, the second option was Glorious Revolution of 1688. So in the Glorious Revolution of November 1688, we have James II and VII, King of England, Scotland and Ireland, who was deposed and replaced by his daughter Mary II and her husband William III of Orange, the de facto ruler of the Dutch Republic. And this term Glorious Revolution was first used by John Hampden in late 1689. So the term Glorious Revolution was first used by John Hampden in late 1689. The third option is Reformation. Now, Reformation was the start of Protestantism and the split of the Western Church into Protestantism and what is now the Roman Catholic Church, mainly due to the differences that appeared in the doctrines. The fourth option is Oxford Movement. Oxford Movement is a 19th century movement centered at the University of Oxford. that sought a renewal of Catholic or Roman Catholic thought and practice within the Church of England in opposition to the Protestant tendencies that prevailed in the Church. And the key figures that were involved with the Oxford movement are John Keble and Henry Newman. So the answer to this question, the Romantic revival in English poetry was influenced by option A, the French Revolution. With that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you.